Welcome to The Landscape, your show about America's parks and public lands. I'm Aaron Weiss with the Center for Western Priorities in Denver.
And I'm Kate Gretzinger in Salt Lake City. Today on the podcast, we're talking to a former Interior Department official about mines, royalties, red tape, cleanup. We'll get to all of it, but first, the news.
Well, we put out a report this week showing that the U.S. Forest Service completed around 35% less wildfire mitigation work in our national forests in 2025 compared to 2024. That is a massive gap coming at exactly the wrong time. I'm sure, as everyone listening to this podcast knows right now, we are entering what looks like maybe a terrible fire season thanks to a dry winter followed by an abnormally hot spring. And now you've got El Nino about to factor into all of this, throwing more chaos. We just saw a report this week from NIFC, the National Interagency Fire Center, predicting above-average fire risk across a whole bunch of the West, in particular in June.
That's right. Forest Service Chief Tom Schultz appeared before a House Natural Resources subcommittee to talk about that wildfire risk and defend the administration's deep cuts to agency staff, which have led to that massive drop in fuel reduction work that we put out in our report. Predictably, Schultz and Republicans on the committee, like Bruce Westerman, acted like wildfire is a simple problem that can simply be solved by increasing logging. They bemoaned the fact that America imports so much of our wood products from other countries like Canada and implied that if we just logged more like Canada, we'd see less wildfire, which, of course, I'll remind folks that Canada had a historically terrible wildfire season last year. Smoke from wildfires in Canada actually turned the sky in New York City orange. So I'm not sure that logging, commercial logging really does much to reduce wildfire risk. Scientists have actually found that it doesn't. It actually makes landscapes more likely to burn because you cut down those mixed sort of growth forests and plant them with trees that all burn at the exact same time. And you cut down the old trees that are resilient to fire and resistant to fire. So no, increasing timber production is not going to magically solve the wildfire problem. And Trump's proposal to reduce the 2027 budget for the Forest Service by 75% certainly won't help either.
No, you watch these hearings and you just want to scream at these folks. Please go talk to any scientist. It's not like this stuff is secret or new. You've got decades of research showing that you can't just chop down all the old trees and imagine that you've logged your way out of wildfire. You just keep making it worse. You've got to leave the old growth intact. All right, separately, news dropped this week in the Washington Post that national park superintendents are being told to not expect any extra money for repairs and deferred maintenance because guess what? President Trump is spending all that money on his vanity projects in Washington, D.C., like the Lincoln Reflecting Pool paint job. We saw some other reporting. $5 million to gild horse statues in Washington, D.C. in actual gold.
Your tax dollars at work, people.
It's just nuts, and it's a shame. Obviously, fountains in D.C. are very nice. We should have working fountains in D.C., but we should also have working sewage systems in Zion National Park. And as I told some reporters earlier this week, it's not a matter of any of these projects being more or less deserving than others. It is truly a matter of urgency when you're looking at a maintenance backlog of billions of dollars to then say, you know what, no, all this other stuff doesn't matter. The president wants to be able to see pretty fountains from his golden throne off the Lincoln bedroom. This is not a responsible use of taxpayer money. And Interior Secretary Doug Burgum is out there defending it as if somehow this is a good idea and this is what Americans want. It's simply not.
It also is worth mentioning that the Trump administration is proposing to cut the overall the overall maintenance budget for the national park system in 2027. So it's not a matter of projects being more deserving than others. It's a matter of funding everything that needs to be done.
Yeah. And I think the big picture here is that it's also sad. All of this happening around America's 250th birthday party, which should be a wonderful celebration to everyone. And instead, we have seen this Freedom 250 group come in and hijack the official birthday celebration and has turned it into something that is so politically toxic that CNC Music Factory and Martina McBride are like, you know what? I'm out. I don't want to do this. How bad do things have to be when all you've got left for a birthday party on the mall is Vanilla Ice and Kid Rock? It's just sad.
Our guest today is Steve Feldgus, an independent consultant who served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management at the Interior Department under President Biden. Steve is here to talk about mine permitting in the United States, a topic he worked on while at Interior. Steve, thanks for being here.
Kate, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So, first of all, you heard me stumble on your title. It's a long one. What does the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Land and Minerals Management do?
Well, a lot of it is trying to come up with extra words to add on to my title.
Right. Well, good job. You did that.
The longest one in federal government. But seriously, you'll see this a lot in the government. You'll see a lot of principal deputy somethings, and usually that means that it's a Senate confirmed position where they don't actually have someone who's confirmed. So in my case, I was sort of acting as the assistant secretary with the direct oversight over the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, and the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement. So we handled a lot of issues dealing with energy and mineral development, but also land management on hundreds of millions of acres across the country.
Wow. I'm glad I asked because I just assumed you were doing BLM stuff, but it sounds like you were doing a whole lot more than that.
Whole bunch. Yep.
Awesome. Yep. Well, I had the pleasure of catching a great presentation you gave on mine permitting at the University of Utah Stegner Center's annual Public Lands Conference. That was a few months ago. And I was really impressed by how interesting you made this topic of mine permitting and mine permitting reform, which can really put someone to sleep if you're not careful. So you did it by debunking industry planted myths about how long it takes to permit a mine in the U.S. And the myth is 7 to 10 years. And you sort of went through how that number was just kind of generated out of thin air. Will you tell that story for our listeners and explain who is spreading that myth and why?
Well, so that's a great example of a talking point that gets out there and then just sticks. It's very popular. You'll hear it all the time in Congress. You'll see it in news articles. And certainly at the Interior Department, when we were running our interagency working group process and getting feedback from a lot of folks on the outside about what to do about mining, we saw this constantly, but we very rarely saw it cited anywhere. So it was basically something people just take at faith. You know, they're like, yeah, sure, 7 to 10 years. Everyone knows that. We teach it in kindergarten. But in fact, the origin of this number is usually traced back to a 2015 report that an organization called SNL put out at the request of the National Mining
Saturday Night Live?
Unfortunately, no, it wasn't that funny.
What is SNL?
Honestly, I don't know. They've since been bought by S&P Global.
Okay.
So
it's a consulting firm.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And they would do reports for companies that, provided funding for them. And one of these organizations was the National Mining Association. So the National Mining Association gave them funding to do this report. And in this report, one of the results was it takes 7 to 10 years to permit a mine in the U.S. They also said it took 2 to 3 years to do in Canada and Australia. So clearly we're doing something wrong, according to this report. Well, if you actually read the report and you look for, what mines did you use to come up with this number? What is the data underlying this? You'll find a footnote that says, we didn't actually collect any new data for this report. We just used what third parties were telling us and accepted that as true. So what you had was the National Mining Association contracting for this report, telling the authors it takes 7 to 10 years to permit a mine, and then that number finding its way into the report. And now that is the National Mining Association's favorite place to point to and say, see, we told you it takes 7 to 10 years. So it's a really great example of circular reasoning. And it's almost like unable to find any any basis for that number.
No basis in fact. That's crazy. It's like they just made it up and then laundered it through a consulting firm report.
That's the best that we've been able to find, yeah.
Interesting. So, how long does it actually take to permit a mine on public land in the U.S. since that number is apparently wrong?
Yeah. Well, the confusing thing is there's so many different numbers you can report, and a lot of times people will throw these around without being specific in what
Yeah.
they're talking about. Are they just talking about the NEPA process? So going into the National Environmental Policy Act and having BLM review your permit, that could be one time. But then also you can go back to when did you first discover the mineral to when did you start actually producing it.
Sure.
That's another time. And there's all different ways to slice this up in between. But when people are talking about permitting, generally they're talking about the federal process of reviewing a mine plan. So that's the Bureau of Land Management or the U.S. Forest Service, getting your plan, taking time to review it, putting it out for public comment, and then eventually approving it at the end. That takes, for the longest mines, for the biggest ones, roughly 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
So quite a bit less than the 7 to 10 that is, thrown out there. So, that number could be brought down a little bit. Certainly, I mean, we have laws now that, like the Inflation Reduction Act, I believe, put a deadline of 2 years on the NEPA process. So, 3 to 4 years, obviously a little higher than that. Certain parts of BLM are able to make that go even quicker. But if we're shaving, we're looking at shaving a year and a half maybe off that particular process, that is not making a very meaningful change in the overall life cycle of going from discovery to production.
How does the U.S. compare to other countries? Are we about on par with Canada, Australia, other countries with reasonable environmental review requirements?
Well, I should have mentioned that if you actually talk to any Canadians and tell them that it takes 2 to 3 years to permit a mine, they may just start laughing. I mean, they have absolutely no idea where that number comes from. If you read comments from the Canadian mining industry or Canadian government officials, they talk about it taking 10 to 15 years
Huh.
to permit a mine. And those are recent numbers. And they're thinking, they're trying to figure out how can they speed that process up as well.
I see.
So it's not some sort of super quick process in Canada that we just haven't figured out. The fact is, it takes a while to bring a mine into production.
Yeah.
That's just, the long and short of it. Now, how we compare to other nations, it's also it's a tough question because the data's not that great. And S&P Global, who is the ones who purchased SNL, every year they put out a report saying where the U.S. ranks internationally in going from discovery to production. So
Okay.
from when you first find some metal to when you're actually able to start selling it. And in the span of 12 months, they went from saying it took the U.S. 13 years, 29 years, and 19 years.
Oh, that's a big
So,
range.
yeah, it's a pretty big range, and especially for it to swing that much in just 1 year. So we don't exactly know all of the data that they used for that. The problem is they seem to be picking just a few mines, and in some cases they're picking some that haven't entered production yet.
Oh.
So you're looking at mines, for example, Thacker Pass. That was lithium was first discovered there, I believe it was the late 70s. But no one was trying to develop lithium in the late
Totally.
70s.
Totally.
It was a very small market, so no one really cared. And it just kind of sat there until the 21st century, lithium starts becoming more useful for batteries. Then companies go back and actually start developing it. So, in the S&P report, they count that as 40 something years.
Wow.
Because they go back to the first discovery in 1979 or whatever it exactly was. But that's very misleading because no one was trying to develop it for decades.
Totally.
So there's a lot of, depending on which mines you throw in there, that changes the numbers a lot. Going from 13 years to 29 years to 19 years, of course, makes a big change in how we look internationally. And in some cases, we're nearly the fastest in the world. In other cases, we are nearly the slowest. And in the third case, we're kind of in the middle. I mean, we're a little slower than average, but faster than Canada. So, you really have any number of, numbers to choose from if you would like.
Well, thank you for giving us so many choices. You are, I would say, one of the experts on this, having overseen it at Interior. Do you think the current timeline that you mentioned for sort of the NEPA permitting process, 3 to 4 years, does that seem reasonable to you?
I don't think it seems horribly unreasonable. It's not the sort of worst case scenarios you hear of 15, 20, 30 years. Those examples do exist, but those are the really controversial mines.
I see.
There's a reason it takes that long. You're trying to build a mine next to a wilderness area or in a very uh, sensitive fishery. I mean, these are mines where people get very worked up and very concerned, and there's a lot of political pushback. Those mines can take a long time, but that's not the NEPA process doing that.
Ah,
The NEPA process, taking 3 to 4 years, I think we can speed that up a little bit. And at BLM in Nevada, they do a very good job of doing a lot of early coordination. So even before they get the permit application from the mine company, they're already having meetings, bringing in state officials, coordinating all the different agencies that will be involved in some sort of permitting process, and bringing the company in as well, and really laying out the expectations and what the timeline should be. And that does a tremendous job at regularly bringing the NEPA process in under 2 years, sometimes not much more than 1 year.
wow.
Now, sometimes, you know, you don't want it to be so quick. Like right now, this administration, in some cases, is just taking a few months. And to do that, in some cases, they're getting rid of public comment periods, which I think is just absolutely the wrong way to go.
I see. So you mentioned earlier that there was a working group, an interagency working group under the Biden administration working on addressing permitting reform and mining law reform. That sounds wrong, but I
Yeah,
think you know what I mean.
absolutely right.
Were you part of that, or were you sort of overseeing it? And what was the goal of that working group?
Yeah, so I was the lead staffer on that working group. It was officially chaired by our deputy secretary at the time, but I was like the lead staffer organizing the meetings and the public comment periods and reviewing all the letters that were sent in. So the idea there was, looking at the pressure that we have for more critical mineral development in this country, which is a bipartisan goal. We
Yeah,
do want to see more lithium and nickel and cobalt and all these critical or strategic minerals that we need for the energy transition, most of all, but also national security, defense applications, technology, healthcare. I mean, the list just goes on and on. We do need these, and the supply chains are very vulnerable. So there is a lot of interest in doing more domestically. Yes, we need to recycle a lot more as well, but we just don't have enough minerals extracted from the earth yet to get where we're going to want to be, say, if we have a net zero economy. So
I
we're
see.
going to have to do more mining. So our idea was, okay, we are currently under a 150-year-old law that governs how we do mining on public lands in this country. So 325 roughly million acres, huge amount of public land, are still governed by this law that was written in 1872.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
There have been a few changes since then. Things have updated a little bit. So, yeah, we wanted to look at how can we make reforms, but not wholesale reforms, although, that has been tried a lot over the last several generations. People have been going at this for a long time.
Yeah.
But the idea was to also look at, well, what could we do from within the Interior Department or other branches of the federal government?
I.e.,
Could
not
we
going through Congress.
Right. Yeah. Some of the major changes you would need to get through Congress, but a lot of these we could also do through just regulatory changes or changes in policy, just how we actually carry out
The
the
law.
activity. Yeah. So, that the idea was to listen to as many people as possible in this process. And we kicked this off actually on precisely the 150th anniversary of the signing of the Mining Law of
Wow.
1872. It was couldn't have planned that any better. And we did this at the White House, and we had this meeting where we invited all sorts of different stakeholders, rights holders, various interests. We had the industry and tribes and states and end users and the list, labor, and the list goes on and on. And what was really gratifying and sad in a way was when some of the tribal representatives spoke, they would say, "This is the first time we have ever been at a table like this.
Wow.
We've never been at the table to discuss these issues alongside the industry and states and end users and everyone else who cares about this issue." So we think it was one of the better efforts at trying to bring as many different voices into this discussion as possible.
Yeah.
And then in September of 2023, we released a report where we made 65 recommendations to Congress and to the executive branch for how we could improve how we do mining in this country.
That's a lot of recommendations. Can you just maybe like go over some of the top ones or your favorites, however you want to answer that question? What were some of the like, maybe biggest reforms that were being recommended?
So one of the biggest issues that we deal with in the US when it comes to mining is really the legacy of mining when it was very poorly regulated. Up until 1980, there were no regulations for how to do mining on Bureau of Land Management land. The Forest Service put out its first regulations in 1974. People have been mining throughout the country going back hundreds and hundreds of years. I don't know exactly when the first mine would have been open,
Well,
but
at least back till 1872, right? When they passed the general mining law.
definitely way before that. I mean, this was, European conquistadors going out there
Oh,
looking
yeah.
for gold. There was, and for them, regulatory adherence was not their number one priority.
Just staying alive.
Yeah, cleaning up after themselves was also not really on the agenda so
No.
much, kill people and get out. So we have a lot of abandoned mines throughout the country. Now, some of these are like small features, like you might have seen from the 1500s,
Yeah.
but others are major mines that were operating in the 20th century that just never got fully cleaned up because the companies didn't have to. It was before the laws that we passed that said that they had to. So we have some estimates are over 500,000 abandoned mine features throughout the country, and we have no source of funding to clean those up.
I see.
For coal mines, which also the history of coal mining in the U.S. goes back hundreds of years
Yeah.
as well, in 1977, Congress passed a law saying we're going to require the coal industry to pay a fee for each ton of coal they mine.
Okay.
And from that fee, we're going to clean up all these leftover coal mines that have been left behind.
Got
A
it.
huge issue especially in like Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Acid mine drainage contaminates
right.
so many streams in those states and throughout the country. And there was just no funding for that either. But in 1977, we started up that fund. It has been incredibly successful. Even in that time, there have been billions and billions, roughly 11 or 12 billion was spent on that until that was before we got to the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021, which put another $11 billion
Wow.
into this program.
But that's
And that's
just
still
for
not-
coal. Just for coal.
It is just for coal.
Okay.
And obviously, it gets more expensive the longer it takes you to clean these sites up. So, that program is incredibly successful. It has done a tremendous amount of good. It does a lot of economic redevelopment, fixes a lot of health problems, environmental problems. So that is an example of what we need to do on the hard rock side.
I see.
And hard rock is gold, copper, silver, all the metals and critical minerals, basically. And we just don't have any dedicated source of funding to do that. So what we do is we scrape by on, maybe a few tens of millions a year.
Wow.
And it can cost hundreds of millions to clean up a single site if it's a large site. So that is probably the number one recommendation in this report is we have to find a way to fund this abandoned mine cleanup.
Got it. And future abandoned mines, I guess, as well are included in that.
Yes, although we have adjusted the laws quite a bit
Okay.
so that companies are supposed to now put up enough bonding or other forms of financial assurance so they just can't do that. So they can't
I see.
leave. Now, there can be some debate whether or not that level is exactly right,
Right.
but they are now on the hook to clean their minds up once they're done with them.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So cleaning up old mines seems like a big problem, and you guys recommended a way to do that. But I assume that would have to go through Congress since it has to do with enacting essentially a tax on these mining companies, right?
Yeah, and there's a number of different ways that you can generate this revenue. It can be through a royalty
Okay.
on these metals. Right now, there is no royalty on precious metals,
Ah,
gold, silver, copper, that are extracted from public lands. Everything else that you do on public lands, if you're extracting a resource, you're paying for that privilege.
yeah.
Basically, you get a certain percentage of, if you're producing oil or digging up coal, you're giving the federal government roughly 12.5% of the value of those minerals. It's, it's public minerals. So that is the public's share of the revenue
Right.
from that. There's 0% for gold, copper, silver, uranium, any of these mines, any of these things
Just
that
take
are
the
under
gold.
the.
It's fine.
Yeah,
We didn't want
come on,
it.
yourself out. It's, if you can find it, more power to you.
We didn't need
Yeah,
that gold anyways.
I mean, gold's pretty cheap these days too, right?
Well, we got away from
mere
the gold standard a while ago, but
yes, yes. So we don't
we don't need that
quite,
government stockpile of gold.
yeah.
Okay, all jokes aside,
Mhm.
I want to get back to permitting reform because
Yes.
members of Congress love to bring this up. In fact, they just were talking about it in some of the Interior Secretary hearings in front of the House and the Senate that I watched in the past month. Members of Congress keep saying, we would do permitting reform if we trusted you, but we don't. But everyone wants to do it, but no one trusts anyone to do it. So what is Congress missing in their discussion of speeding up permitting? Because they all seem to agree that needs to happen, but they don't trust each other to do it. Do we need to speed up permitting? And if so, what are some of the ways you would go about doing that, at least for mining?
Well, I think we need to look at improving the overall process. And Congress is very fixated on the idea of speeding up sort of like the back end of things. Like, how do we get NEPA done as fast as possible? And then how do we cut off lawsuits so that these things don't, go through courts for, years and years.
I see.
It's all on the back end, basically. What we have found, what mining companies find, what academic researchers find, is the best way to ensure better permitting is to do more early on. Talk to people early, engage with them, find out what their concerns are, what they would like to see or not like to see, what areas are particularly, for example, for tribes, where are the sacred sites, what are the areas that are used for religious ceremonies, and how can you avoid those? And the earlier and the more meaningful you make that engagement, the better the permitting process works, because you're removing those sources of conflict that are what causes things to take a long time on the back end. It's much easier when a company is still figuring out exactly what the mine's going to look like to make adjustments based on what a community cares about.
I see.
However, if you're already in the permitting process, you've already spent a ton of money getting to this point and designing a mine. Now, if an argument comes up or there's a conflict, the company is incentivized to just push through it. Either like
Right.
steamroll the opposition or take it to court or do whatever, and then that's when the legal battles start. So it's really so much better for companies and for communities and for the government to get these things started as early as possible. And there is so much opportunity to do that in mining because it takes a really long time to get to the point where a company is ready to submit an application to permit their mine.
I see.
That's where you probably have 7 to 10 years is all this pre-permitting time. That's a lot of time to build relationships, build more trust, and figure out how to solve some of the problems that otherwise will come up later.
And how could the government, improve that part of the process? Could they incentivize more? I'm curious. Just I feel like you probably haven't. I don't need to throw out answers that I just came up with. You guys know what to do. What's the answer?
Well, it's actually it's not an obvious answer because it's very tough to legislate or regulate something that's designed to build trust. If you want a company out there talking to a community or tribes years before they're ready to submit a permit application, how do you put that in law? Then you end up with the possibility that it also could just be a, check the box, how can we get around this as quickly as possible sort of exercise. So it's on both sides there. It's on the government to do some things, but it's also on the company to understand that they have to do some things. And there are certainly some things that the government can do in regulation or in statute that would be very helpful. Better understanding of how to do tribal consultation, for example. We have a variety of executive orders, and there's a little bit in law in the National Historic Preservation Act, but we don't have good guidance to the agencies or the companies or the tribes as to what makes good tribal consultation. How do you know that you've actually meaningfully talked to a tribe?
Right.
And if you don't, you're open to potential lawsuits. So we can do better there for sure. We can also incentivize companies to do earlier outreach, to get consent from communities and tribes, to do the things we want to see them doing. And a lot of ideas you could have there. We can't lower the royalty rate for them because it's already at 0%. So, that's not very helpful. But you can provide tax benefits. You can come up with better ways to move through the permitting process if they take these steps. So there's a number of ideas in that report. But there's also a lot of potential ideas out there to still figure out. So we're still talking to a lot of folks about that.
I see. And one thing that comes to mind for me, I've been working in this field a while and know about efforts to speed up permitting for renewable energy development that were undertaken a while back in California, where the BLM basically looked at the BLM lands in California and said, here's some places where it's really sunny. Why don't you just build solar there? And if you build solar there, we'll fast track your permitting, essentially, because they sort of said, this is a good place for solar. We're going to do some of the permitting process preemptively so that companies can come in and build faster here. Is that like, I'm trying to remember, the the renewable energy something law that I should have, DRCP.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about. I think most of our listeners do because we've talked about it before. Is that a possibility in the mining realm? Could the BLM or the federal government, USGS, kind of say, like, here are some places where you guys should build mines and then make it faster to build mines there?
Short answer is no.
Okay.
The long answer is no, not really. So it is great for solar.
Okay.
And that Western Solar Plan that we updated in the Biden administration.
Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan. It came to me.
Right. Well, that goes back much further. That was under the Obama administration.
I think so,
and that was worked out with California,
right.
And that is for the California desert specifically. So that actually was pretty well set. Though the Western Solar Plan process that we did was looking at the other states.
I see. Okay, kind of bringing the other ones into that same framework.
Right. And we had done a few states like that under Obama, like the southwestern ones, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico.
The sunny ones.
The very sunny ones, the ones you expect for solar. This time we threw in all the western states. So it included Montana and Idaho and Washington and Oregon and perhaps your less sunny states. But still, I mean, these states have great solar resources. A lot just depends on how expensive it is to build the plants or get the power to market. So what's great about that is we didn't just look at, where is it sunny? Where could you get a lot of electricity out of it? But also, where are the conflicts? Whether it's endangered species habitat or, very fragile wetlands or, wildlife corridors. We avoided those. We said those, we're going to take those off limits. All right. Because we don't want to have these fights over, what's more important, renewable energy or sage grouse habitat. We shouldn't be talking about that. We should be putting solar where it makes the most sense and where there's going to be the fewest resource conflicts. And so that's what we aim to do with solar. And we could do that because we do land use planning when it comes to solar.
Yeah.
So under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, BLM does planning for where can you put solar and wind, and for that matter, oil and gas development and coal
Yeah.
development, grazing and wildlife and recreation. And your
Kind
listeners
of
probably know
everything else other than mining.
everything else except for mining.
Ah.
Yeah,
And
mining is exempt from the land use planning process.
why is that?
Because the mining law is a very powerful law, has a lot of political support. So when FLTMA was being drafted, there were a lot of recommendations to go to a leasing system with mining, and
I
that
see.
would have created this ability to do planning around where mines make sense and where they don't. Mining got exempted. I don't know. I was like 3 years old at the time, so I was not responsible for the negotiations over what went into FLTMA, but mining was exempt. So miners have the ability to go anywhere on public lands that's not withdrawn and stake claims. And we can't tell them that, hey, this is a better area or this is a worse area, um, largely because we haven't done the study to figure that out, but also because there's really no point to doing the study because we can't direct them to the best places. That is probably the most fundamental change that you could imagine seeing in mining is moving it to a leasing system
Yeah.
and making it subject to planning. Of course, this is something that the mining industry staunchly opposes,
Right.
and yeah, it's it's a long, long story.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. And yeah, we'll leave it at that for now. But I do want to return to something you mentioned earlier, which is this expedited permitting the Trump administration is doing. And before we well, actually, yeah, I'll get into it now. So listeners may remember that the BLM permitted a mine called the Velvet Wood Uranium Mine in San Juan County last year. That permitting process took just 11 days and was done under a provision called Fast 41. Of course, people were not happy with that. People in Utah here are very concerned about it. Will you tell our listeners a little bit about Fast 41? What is that? And sort of like what authority is the administration using to do these fast reviews? Are they even legal? And what are the risks of speeding up reviews to 11 days, for example, for a uranium mine?
Yeah, so it's a very tough question, very good one. And Fast 41 often gets misinterpreted a bit because it really isn't designed to speed things up an awful lot.
Okay.
All right. Anything that gets added to the Fast 41 list, instantly the headlines are, oh, it's being added to the streamline process and so forth. It's being like pushed through super fast. Honestly, if you followed the Fast 41 process and NEPA regularly, well, to the letter, you would be taking longer than the Trump administration is taking now. What they're doing is, well, two things. First, they declared an energy emergency.
Ah,
And under that emergency, they can use these emergency authorities to wipe away requirements in NEPA and other laws. So that's one way to speed things up. What they're doing now is they've completely changed how they do NEPA. For 50 years, basically since NEPA was passed, the process would be BLM would notice that, or anyone at DOI would put out a notice saying, we're going to put together an environmental impact statement. They'd go off and do it. They would put out a draft. That draft would be open for comment for a certain number of days, usually 45, could be 60, could be longer. That was up to the agency. But then they would go back, take all those comments, and use that to improve the EIS, then put out a final and wait 30 days. And then they would issue the record of decision, which is when they say, yes, go ahead, you can do it. What the Trump administration did is they used another court case that was decided at the end of the Biden administration to just wipe away all the existing NEPA regulations that all the agencies had
I see.
and said, you guys go do your own. So DOI now has NEPA regulations. Actually, no, sorry, NEPA procedures. They're not even in regulation. They're just this policy document. It cuts out the need for putting out a draft environmental impact statement.
Ah,
They can go straight from, hey, we're putting out an EI, we're going to develop an EIS, and then they'll give you a little time to weigh in on what you think they should look at. And then the very next thing you do could be the record of decision.
So
No
there's
draft.
no public comment.
They will consider those 30 days they give you when they put out a notice of intent to be the public comment. And that meets the
Okay, but you're
requirements.
commenting on their final plan, not a draft plan. So there's not
No,
really an
you're not even commenting on their final. When they put out the notice of intent, that's them saying, we're going to do an EIS. What should we look at?
okay.
And then you would write in with, please check all the water resources, sacred sites, wildlife, etc. But that's it. So they did this with a mine in southeastern Utah called the Lisbon Valley Mine.
Okay.
And this was the first one they did. And they put out the record of decision approving the mine in the middle of the shutdown. So because we were in the middle of the government shutdown, they did not post the press release
Oh.
on their website.
Oops.
I have yet to see more than maybe like one or two stories pointing out, hey, they completely skipped the draft EIS, which under their new policy, you're allowed to do.
I see.
So the danger there, first of all, there are a lot of things in these draft EISs that can be fixed. All right, there are mistakes in there. There are things that, sometimes you have people in there that are, contact info for people who are dead. It happens. And the comment periods are helpful for doing things like, hey, by the way, did you know that guy's dead? You should come up with a different contact, to much more meaningful things like you completely ignored looking at this resource, or you are not using the best science about the endangered species. And then the agency would have to consider those. And these make a huge difference in improving these EISs. And if you don't have that public comment period, you're going straight to final, straight to that decision. And what you end up with is a much, much higher chance of a flawed EIS. And even with the Supreme Court trying to rein in some of the length and breadth of some of these NEPA court cases, I mean, if you just have a blatantly inadequate EIS that is missing obvious data or just makes completely wild claims that aren't supported, I mean, that will still get thrown back and vacated. So there's a lot of
Okay.
legal risk. There's a lot of legal risk for the individual projects.
Hmm.
And then the way that DOI went to these new procedures is also being challenged. There are lawsuits on that because they did that without public comment either. They just
I
changed
see.
their procedures overnight.
So just to clarify, make sure I got this right in my own head, they're seeking public comment before putting out a draft EIS or any sort of EIS, and then they kind of say we're gonna do this. There's a public comment period, and then they put out the actual EIS, and then they finalize it. Is that how it's going these days?
Yeah, I mean they go straight to they listen to your comments at the very beginning. Hey, we're gonna do an EIS for this mine. What do you think? All right, here's 30 days to write in. And then the next like a year later or whenever, maybe less, they made the decision. They put out the final EIS and said, we're approving this. And you've had no chance to challenge anything that they actually put in their environmental review.
I see. And what are, some of the risks of this type of permitting? You mentioned that it's more open to litigation or more at risk of being litigated. What are the environmental risks that we face from the Lisbon Valley mine, for example, or this Velvet Wood mine that were permitted really quickly and without significant public input?
Well, it's hard for me to say about the specific mines because I'm not as familiar with the details of those individual environmental impact statements, so don't know what might be missing. But generically, overall, you're just really increasing the chance that BLM is completely ignoring something that's very important, or they have some faulty data, or they didn't talk to people. There's a lot of potential for error that gets thrown in there, and a lot of potential for an inadequate environmental review. I mean, that happens a lot where they put out a draft EIS, and then people weigh in and say, no, you need to look at these other things, and then BLM will, or whatever agency will do that. So you're certainly increasing the chance that you have a substandard environmental review. And that's That's a big problem. You also have this impression that this project is getting railroaded through. And while the administration might be fine with that, a lot of these companies are not. And we do know of companies that have rejected the ability to do these accelerated processes because they know how important it is to actually look trustworthy to the community where they're going to build this mine. So, for example, something like Velvet Wood, that project might have just gone through with very few people paying any attention. But by doing a environmental review in 11 days, all of a sudden,
It was in the Washington Post. It was in the New York Times.
right. So, you're drawing negative attention to these projects that the companies, they would rather take more time and get things right and make sure that people feel like they're being heard than just like, oh, great, let's get a 2-month EIS. Because you might be cutting a year off the process, but you might be building in 5 more years of litigation because you have built this opposition that might not have been there before.
I see. Well, looking forward, we're in this political moment. We're facing, we're looking towards the midterms. Democrats may have a chance to pass some laws in Congress at some point. And we may, someday get a president who is open to improving the mining process again. What are some of the sort of scenarios you're looking towards where we might get some mining reform done? And what would that look like politically?
Well, yeah. Well, certainly a lot would depend on this upcoming election and who is in control of what chamber of Congress, and then also what the agenda is on oversight. I mean, a lot of committees, rightfully, are very interested in investigating this administration if Democrats take power. So that could be like the number one priority. And okay, I'm certainly in favor of more investigations of what these guys are doing. But it will depend. There are always the chances of weird things happening that you don't understand, largely because it's very difficult to understand the motivations of the White House and the president. I mean, in his first term, don't get me wrong, I didn't agree with anything that he did or said. However, he did sign permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Now, I'm not actually sure if they're funding it now, so, they could be screwing that one good thing up that they did. But you can occasionally get things through that if, enough people are in favor of, especially, enough of his people are in favor of, he might be willing to sign. So we're not necessarily counting on any of that happening. What we are hoping is if we do have a Democratic Congress or at least one chamber, to have more of these discussions, to have hearings on a different way to think about permitting. Not just thinking about how to make it as fast as possible at the end and just like cut through red tape or so, but how to actually build a better process and do something where you're getting rid of that conflict that causes all the lawsuits and the fights on the other end.
I see. So rather than cutting through the red tape, just maybe avoiding it, going around it, making it so that there is less red tape to cut through by doing a better job.
So a law professor from the University of Utah that I work with, Jamie Plune, she has a preprint out that's called Red Tape is a Red Herring. And the idea is it's not so-called red tape that's slowing anything down. It is the fights. It is public opposition. It's things that try to move too fast end up getting slowed down and kicked back. And that is the idea. There are processes that can be streamlined, smoothed out. There can be better coordination. We've done some of that. We've seen how it works. It can do wonderful things, but that can't be your only goal.
Yeah.
And it's not going to, if we want to get more of the critical minerals that we need for the energy transition, we can't do it by continuing to slice away at NEPA. And it's not going to just be NEPA. The folks who are pushing NEPA reform are also pushing Clean Water Act reform and Clean Air Act and National Historic Preservation Act and Endangered Species Act. And what will happen is they will think they've fixed one problem and then they'll be like, oh, wait, it still takes forever. We have to eliminate this other law. And it'll just be one domino after another.
We have to eliminate this entire species.
Basically, it will get to that point. I
Yeah.
mean, they convened the God Squad so
Yeah.
they can basically make Rice's whale extinct in the Gulf. So,
That's one way
yeah,
to solve a problem.
yeah, that will certainly do it for you. I mean, don't think it's the best way to go, but
Right.
yeah.
Steve, thank you so much for being with us today. This was an awesome conversation about a somewhat arcane topic.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope no one's fallen asleep along the way here so far.
No,
Two
you're a
times.
great messenger. You're very energetic.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye.
Here's a little good news to end this episode. After nearly 25 years, Wyoming is just one step away from formally designating the southern portion of the Path of the Pronghorn, which is one of North America's most important wildlife migration routes. A working group convened in February by Governor Mark Gordon has sent its recommendations to his office. If he approves it, it will become official, and state agencies would then have to consider the corridor when they're reviewing permits and land use decisions with a goal of avoiding, minimizing, or mitigating impacts to migrating pronghorn whenever possible.
Well, that is it for us today, folks. Kate has a new article up on our Substack about Doug Burgum's ties to the Yellowstone Club, a private luxury ski resort in Montana. Go check that out, as well as listen to our previous episode about Burgum's ties to the Yellowstone Club and what all of that has to do with access to public lands in the Crazy Mountains and beyond in Montana. We've also got a Westwise article about mine permitting and regulations coming out soon, thanks to that awesome conversation with Dr. Feldgus.
Thanks again to Steve for his time today, and thank you for listening to The Landscape.